At the end of the 1990s, Russia's first president, Boris Yeltsin, began thinking about ending his political career. There were several serious reasons for this. The economic crisis in the country was deepening, public dissatisfaction was growing, and even within the political elite, trust in him had sharply declined.
Я ухожу.
In such circumstances, Vladimir Putin entered the political arena, and his rule began, 22 years officially, but in reality, lasting 26 years.
A story is told about the politician who turned 73 on the 7th of October.
Vladimir Putin was born in 1952 in Leningrad, now St. Petersburg, to a poor family. His grandfather, Spiridon Ivanovich, worked as a cook at the country houses of prominent figures in the Communist Party of the USSR. His father, Vladimir Spiridonovich, fought mainly on the Leningrad front during World War II and was awarded several orders and medals for his service. Both of Putin's parents passed away shortly before he became president of Russia. As a student, Vladimir was known as a tough and hot-tempered boy. His close friends recalled that he was always ready to fight any opponent and seemed to know no fear. Nevertheless, as a small and thin young man growing up in a city full of street gangs, he had to learn to defend himself.
Еще 50 лет назад Ленинградская улица меня научила одному правилу. Если драка неизбежна, бить надо первым.
At the age of 12, he began practicing sambo and later switched to judo. Putin was strict and disciplined. By the age of 18, he had earned a black belt in judo and took third place in the national junior competition.
People used to avoid house number 4 on Liteyny Prospect in Leningrad, the headquarters of the KGB. During Stalin's time, so many people passed through its interrogation cells on their way to the Gulag camps that a grim local joke spread around the city. This big building not only represented Leningrad, but even its basement looked out towards Siberia. 8 years later, a young man named Vladimir, who had finished high school with average grades and behavior, dreamed of becoming an intelligence officer, as the totalitarian system had raised young people to admire such careers. At just 16, Putin boldly walked straight into the fearsome KGB building that everyone else avoided and asked a startled officer how one could get a job there. He was told that he needed either to serve in the army or to earn a university degree first. From that day, Putin decided to study law and pursue a position in state security, believing that in such an institution one could advance even without being directly tied to the Communist Party.
Between 1974 and 1975, Vladimir studied at the Faculty of Law of Leningrad University. After graduation, he was employed by the Committee for State Security, KGB, with the rank of lieutenant. From 1977 onward, he began working in the counterintelligence department of the KGB. Due to his initiative and energy, he gradually rose through the ranks of the organization. In 1984, Putin graduated from the Yuri Andropov Red Banner Institute of Intelligence in Moscow. During his studies, he used the surname Platonov, as required by KGB regulations. Even students in the same course were not supposed to know each other's real identities. The aliases were assigned by the leadership. Under the name Platonov, he distinguished himself academically, became the head of his study group, and mastered the German language in depth.
Even if you didn't expect much from Putin, during his time in the KGB, he didn't achieve significant growth. He always remained an average employee and was never promoted to a high-ranking position. In 1985, Vladimir began working in the communications department of the KGB in Dresden. By the late 1980s, communist regimes began to collapse one after another. In particular, by November 1989, the Berlin Wall fell, and thousands of Germans took to the streets for freedom. They even attacked the KGB office where Putin was serving. Their goal was to seize the intelligence archives belonging to the Soviet Secret Service. However, Putin managed to disperse the Germans without using weapons and destroyed the secret materials he had collected. After that, in January 1990, he completed his work in Germany and returned to Leningrad.
Against this backdrop, it has been noted that Putin has learned lessons from the sudden collapse of central authority and gained experience in acting swiftly and decisively in such situations, ensuring that, when confronted with opposition, he would never repeat the mistake made by Mikhail Gorbachev, the last leader of the new United Soviets.
After the collapse of the Soviet Union, Putin left the KGB. In 1990, he began working as an assistant to the rector at Leningrad State University. The rector, Merkuriev, introduced him to the city's mayor, Anatoly Sobchak, recommending Putin as a trustworthy employee. In 1991, after Sobchak was re-elected as mayor of St. Petersburg, Vladimir became his advisor on international affairs. Putin later emphasized that Sobchak played a major role in shaping his political views and referred to him as his mentor. In 1996, after Anatoly Sobchak lost the gubernatorial election, Putin said that he also considered leaving politics at that time. However, new opportunities awaited him in Moscow. Pavel Borodin, the manager of the Presidential Property Department of Russia, invited him to become his deputy. A year later, in 1997, Putin was appointed Deputy Chief of Staff of the Presidential Administration, replacing Alexei Kudrin.
In 1998, Putin became the head of the Federal Security Service, FSB, the successor to the KGB. His rise through the ranks of power was rapid. In August 1999, President Boris Yeltsin appointed him as Prime Minister. Having served less than 5 months in that position, Putin was named Yeltsin's successor on December 31, 1999. From the first day of the new millennium, January 1, 2000, he began serving as acting president of Russia.
Вот это государство вы сами и формировали. В значительной степени через подконтрольные вам политические и околополитические структуры. Поэтому меньше всего, наверное, нужно кивать на зеркало.
Thus begins Putin's 22-year rule, or effectively 26 years in power. According to international experts, Yeltsin brought Putin to the presidency in order to protect himself and cover up his own wrongdoings. One of Putin's first actions as president was to grant Yeltsin a full pardon, ensuring him immunity from any criminal or administrative investigations, including protection of his documents, residence, and other property from searches or confiscation.
Russia's new leader had never been a deputy or a governor and had no experience surviving in a political environment. However, several factors helped Putin gain popularity among Russians and consolidate his power. In particular, in 1999, Putin launched a war against Chechen militants. At that time, the country was facing instability, terrorist attacks, and economic decline. It was precisely his success in the Chechen War that helped form his image as a leader capable of restoring order. For example, in August 1999, while serving as prime minister, 33% of Russians approved of his performance, while 31% disapproved. Just a month later, after the start of the Second Chechen War, his approval rating nearly doubled to 65%, while the number of those disapproving fell to about 21%.
By the late 2000s, the global oil market experienced a sharp price increase. In particular, at the beginning of the 2000s, a barrel of oil cost around $28, while by the summer of 2008, the price exceeded $130. Since oil and gas made up a large part of Russia's exports, budget revenues grew several times over. As a result, the amounts of salaries, pensions, and social payments increased. This created the perception that life was improving under Putin's rule. During this period, the Kremlin also took full control of the main television channels and began to shape the flow of information to present Putin as a leader working for the people and restoring the nation.
When Vladimir Putin became president of Russia in the 2000s, he hoped to establish positive relations with the West on his own terms, including preserving Russia's influence over the territories of the former Soviet Union. But soon, these hopes were dashed. He came to believe that the West was isolating and humiliating Russia, and he grew increasingly angry. When Georgian President Mikhail Saakashvili decided to bring his country into NATO, Putin lost his patience. Under the pretext that Georgia was trying to take control of South Ossetia, a breakaway region supported by Russia, he launched a punitive military operation. Within 5 days, Russian forces crushed the Georgian army and forced Saakashvili into signing a humiliating agreement. The West was outraged by these events, but a year later, U.S. President Barack Obama proposed a reset of relations with Russia. Moscow even won the right to host the 2018 FIFA World Cup. This greatly inspired Putin. He concluded that Western leaders may make noise, but in the end, they yield before strong will. As a result, viewing Russia as the legal successor to the Soviet Union, he began working to restore political, military, and economic control over neighboring countries.
In November 2023, a major agreement on mutual integration between Ukraine and the European Union was supposed to be signed in Vilnius, the capital of Lithuania. However, Ukrainian President Viktor Yanukovych surprised everyone by refusing to sign the deal. This decision deeply disappointed Ukrainians, who had been hoping for visa-free travel to Europe. As a result, the Maidan, Euromaidan, protests began. Yanukovych fled to Russia, while Kyiv's main square filled with demonstrators demanding that the government sign the EU integration agreement. A new government came to power in Ukraine, promising closer ties with Europe and a move away from Russia's influence. Russia, unwilling to accept this shift, began arming pro-Russian groups in eastern Ukraine and even sent its own troops. Armed clashes broke out. Crimea was annexed by Russia, an act Ukraine and Western countries condemned as an invasion. Parts of Donetsk and Luhansk declared themselves under Russian influence. Tensions escalated further, and on February 24, 2022, Russia launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine under the pretext of a special military operation announced by Vladimir Putin. The conflict continues to this day.